Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. We've gone through the complete A to Z of PS1 Hidden Gems, showing off some of the games that you may have missed out of the thousands on offer. The thing is, going from A to Z meant that 0 to 99, or to whatever number, got left out. So, of course, we need to right that wrong as we take a look at 10 games that you might have missed that start with a number. Now, for the last time in this series, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. Let's start with One Extreme. It's a funky extreme racing game, and you can tell that just from the way it's spelled incorrectly. The game is packed with a ton of different races, each of which has their own stats in speed, handling, and even health. As well as this, they each have different stats for the various modes of racing you have here. You see, as this is so extreme, you can choose from everyone's favourite extreme sports modes of transport: a bicycle, some rollerblades, a skateboard, and of course the street luge, which is random, but I kinda like it. The game plays out exactly as you'd expect. You choose your racer, what you want to race with, and the track. Then it's off to the races. There aren't a ton of tracks to choose from, but the ones you get here are fairly varied, with tracks from all over the world that feature a load of jumps, hazards and twists and turns. The tracks themselves are fairly wide, thankfully, and there's 16 racers at any time in one race. What's cool is that, a lot like the Road Rash games, you can attack your opponents as well, giving them a swift kick or punch if they get too close. This is always fun to do, but yeah, they'll do it back, so watch out. And you do have to watch out, as the opponents here are all pretty tough, and it is actually hard to win a race, at first at least. As you play, you earn money, and you can of course use this to buy better equipment with higher top speeds, better handling and all that jazz. You'll need to do this, as you don't really stand a chance of winning anything with your default equipment. Annoyingly though, the menus here are a bit of a pain in the ass to navigate, with you having to press just about every direction on the controller to get the menu that you're after. It's very unintuitive, but once you are used to it, it's not so bad. But it did take me way longer than it should have done to realise how to change your mode of transport. What's cool is that it doesn't really matter what character you use, they can all use everything. It's just that some are better with different modes of transport than other ones. They do all control quite well though, and there's even gates on the courses you can go through for more points and therefore more money. This is easy to do, though I did sometimes smash my face into them rather than going through them, but really that's on me. The graphics aren't too great. They're all pre-rendered characters on some pretty ropey 3D levels. It's not terrible, but you can tell it is an early game for the system. The controls are actually quite good. I actually like how it controls, and it helps a bit with the cornering, leaving you more room to deal with any obstacles that are in the way. Overall, this is actually a pretty fun game, with a decent amount of variety. The fact that you aren't in cars means that it isn't the fastest game out there, but it is good enough once you've upgraded your equipment a bit. One Extreme did well enough to get a couple of sequels. I've skipped the second one here, but here is the third one, 3 Extreme. Very imaginative. It's pretty much more of the same here. You choose from a roster of characters, but for some reason they've taken out the option to choose what you ride on. Instead, each character either has a bike, skates or skateboard, and that's it. You can't choose one character and then a different mode of transport, which is a little bit odd. Also, and more tragically, they've gotten rid of the street luge, which is criminal. The actual gameplay is basically the same though. You choose your character and compete in a series of races, earning dollar bills which you can use to buy new equipment. More courses and characters do become available as you play. They've changed the graphics here, and it is all 3D polygons, and it still doesn't look particularly great, but it's definitely a bit of an improvement. I think it is anyway, I can't really decide. They've actually added a few new things though. You still have jumps and ramps here, and you can actually do proper tricks now, which is kinda cool. They're easy to pull off, and you just need to make sure you have enough air to complete the trick so you don't land on your ass or face. The tracks are all decently varied, though I was a bit disappointed with the one that keeps showing you signs for a zoo, but then you never actually go in the zoo. I was expecting a bit more crazy in the variety, but it was still kind of fun. Overall, this is very similar to the first game, but it's definitely an improvement. It's a shame they took out some of the features, but they left the combat and the decent control, which is all that really matters. So yeah, I'd say give it a go if you do like racing games. "3D Lemmings" is a cool little puzzle game that takes the classic 2D action into 3D. The goal of the game here is simple. You're given a ton of levels that have a start point and an exit. Little green-haired lemmings will be dropped into the level, and you have to get a certain amount of them to the exit. It's not that easy though, as the lemmings will just walk in a straight line, only changing direction when they're told to, and they'll literally bounce off walls and go into any hazards that are ahead of them. It's a very simple formula that works very well. To help the lemmings get to where they need to be, you've got a bunch of different actions that you can assign to them. However, the number of lemmings you can assign each action to is different from level to level. You can ask them to block a path or change the direction of other lemmings, you can get them to dig or smash walls or climb and so on, and you'll need to use a combination of all these things to get through the large mazes. The game starts off with a pretty annoying intro, forcing you to play through 20 training levels before you get to the main game, which is especially annoying when you're trying to capture footage. But also because these cannot be skipped or failed, and you have to complete them all, even though some of them are so self-explanatory they're just a waste of time. But having said that, some of them were actually quite handy, though I don't see why you're forced to play through them, especially as I own the PC game, the Saturn version and the PS1 here, and I've played them so many times. But yeah, I know not everyone will have done that, but forced tutorials are just a pain in the butt. Anyway, once you've waded through the training levels, which takes about an hour or so, then you get to the main levels, which are really tricky and all feature a lot of trial and error and forward planning, which is always the point of Lemmings games. You can move the camera around pretty much anywhere you want, which is handy, and you can also pause the game but still move the camera around, so it's often advisable to do that at the start of a new level just to have a look around and see what you might need to do. This doesn't always help, and you will need to try a few times on a lot of levels, but again, that's sort of the point of these games. The levels themselves are quite large and the 3D world makes it very complex, but this is a pretty addictive game. I've always been a fan of the Lemmings games, and the transition to 3D is actually surprisingly good. The graphics here are fine, the lemmings are all pre-rendered and have some cool animations, and the levels are all 3D and they look alright, but there isn't a ton of detail. The controls here are probably the biggest issue. They are pretty clunky and can feel quite unresponsive at times. There are so many buttons needed just for moving the camera that it gets very confusing at times, especially when you're trying to scrabble around to find a certain lemming that you need. You never control the lemmings directly, you can only assign them tasks. You do this with R1, which I sometimes forgot and would instinctively press X, which actually moves the camera down instead, so I'd lose my position and sometimes kill a lemming or two, where they weren't told to stop from walking off a cliff. But once you do get used to it, it is a lot of fun and can easily take up hours of your time. I would recommend the PC version over this one for better graphics and camera control, but really this isn't a bad version at all, and I did get hooked once I'd done those bloody training levels. Well worth a look if you like your puzzle games. If you want some sport action, then maybe you want to check out 3D Baseball, but not likely. Yeah, it's a baseball game, and as far as I know, for a baseball game, it's fine, though I'm definitely no expert. I do have to say though, I actually quite like playing baseball games, and this one was easy to pick up and play, and kept me entertained for a little while. You pick your team from what I assume are all super popular teams from around the world of baseball, so America. Then you take it in turns to hit the ball or catch the ball. Now, I'm not going to try and explain the rules, as I'm pretty sure any of you watching will know way more than I ever will. But this plays like a solid game, all things considered. Bowling is easy, you press a button to throw it, and direct it a little with the D-pad. If they hit the ball, you'll control the nearest catcher person, and it's actually very easy to control where they run and throw any caught balls too, which is nice. Then when you're batting, you just have to position yourself and swing and hope for the best. If you get it right, you'll get a home run. Go you. I did find, however, that the computer AI is pretty damn good at fielding and would catch me out almost every time. It was really hard to score any runs, though I do imagine that with a bit more practice I would get better at aiming my hits, and of course would probably get some home runs only from then on. That's all there is really to the gameplay. It's very simple. You have a few modes where you can play a single game or a league tournament thingy if that floats your boat. For me, I would never do this, but hey, some people love that stuff and good for them. Graphically, the game's alright. It's very basic, even for the PS1, but it does run smoothly and you can see what's going on pretty much all the time. The controls are simple and there's not really any complaints there. I actually like that it's not overly complicated. So yeah, if you like baseball, then you might want to give this a try for a bit of entertainment, but I doubt many of you are going to go out and rush out and play it.
A chopper to the right side. He scoops it up. They got it. Bernie.
16 Tales 2 is a bit of a funny one, as it's not actually a game, but a collection of Asian folk stories, and there's not 16 of them, only 4. And you literally just choose which one you want to watch, and then you watch it. The stories are introduced by a cool guy who I kinda like, he looks nice. He explains what the story is and what's going on, and tells you a bit about the culture, and they didn't even really bother to edit out any of his mistakes, which kinda makes it even more of a joy to watch. Each of the stories are a collection of still images with a bit of camera zooming, and that's literally it. You just watch the stories. I will admit, I didn't watch all of them. In fact, I made it about halfway through the first one, and that was enough for me. The FMV quality is quite ropey, but what you'd expect. And to be fair, there's nothing really wrong with this. If you like the stories, then you'll have a good time. But yeah, it's not even a game, just a collection of stories that are designed for kids, and they all have a moral at the end of them. So if that seems like something you'd enjoy, then you go crazy.
But as he told her, his hope went away, and he got very...
Time for something that is actually quite exciting. Here is 007 Racing from EA. Now, despite the game's name, this isn't actually a racing game, so they've already lied to you there, typical EA. Instead, this is more of a vehicle combat game, like a mix between Twisted Metal and the driving bits from Die Hard Trilogy. And actually, on paper, that's not a bad premise for a Bond game, as the movies always have crazy car chases with guns, rockets, oil slicks and more, and you get to play around with all of that stuff here. There's a typical generic Bond story here about arms dealers and blowing shit up, and there's a few familiar characters in the game from past and present movies, and also a few recognisable vehicles. Oh, and when I say present movies, I mean the ones up to 1999 or whenever this came out. There is a decent amount of levels here. You drive different vehicles in each one as well, but you can't choose what vehicles you want for what levels, which would have been nice. So you can't go back to play with another car, but I can kind of see why that isn't an option here. Your objectives vary from level to level. Sometimes you need to pick up someone and drop them off at places. Other times you're defusing bombs by driving over them, of course. Sometimes you've got to take out other vehicles like cars, tanks and even helicopters. And other times you just have to get from point A to point B within the time limit. The variety is actually quite good, though not everything else is. You start out with your basic machine gun here, but that's all but useless against anything that isn't a regular human. To defeat other vehicles, you'll need rockets and missiles to blow them to bits. The problem is that the splash damage from these is crazy, and you'll almost always take a hell of a lot of damage yourself when you use them, and the places that you're fighting other vehicles are often pretty small. But it is doable. In fact, some of the objectives here are quite unclear, and there's a lot of trial and error. Also, some of the levels, being small, mean that the enemy cars are almost always right behind you, and as far as I could tell, the oil slicks and smoke screens were basically useless. But you'll eventually learn the best ways to get through the levels. It's Pierce Brosnan's Bond here, and you get surprisingly a few of the actors to do their own voices. Not Bond though, he's done by an imitator, and it's not too bad, actually, yes it is. Something that's a little bit strange here is that the music cuts out every time somebody talks, and then it starts again from the beginning sometimes. This is very annoying and seems like a very cheap thing that they could have sorted out. It's not a particularly great looking game, in fact it's pretty damn ugly, though the cutscenes here are excellent. The controls are okay though, it varies from vehicle to vehicle as you'd expect, some feel great, some just spin out every time you breathe on the controller. Overall, this game is kind of fun at times. It is extremely unpolished and has a lot of bullshit moments in it, but it's cool seeing the different levels and vehicles. It is worth looking at for cheap, just don't have high expectations. Forty Winks is a charming 3D platform game where you play as either Rough or Tumble, who I hope have reported their parents to child services, because that's not okay. You choose which one to play as at the start of the game, though there's not really any difference between them that I could really tell. The story here is that the Winks, with an I, protect kids from nightmares, and some evil bastard has decided to kidnap them all. So kids' dreams are getting turned into nightmares, and you have to go into the dream world to defeat the monsters that have taken the Winks and rescue them. Your adventure takes you through some pretty cool, quite large levels, from Halloween-themed places, space, deserts, underseas, and even prehistoric ones. Each world is divided up into different levels, and each of which have a certain number of Winks that you'll need to find. These are often hidden in hard-to-reach places, being behind a big door, though sometimes you will also need to fight a boss or big enemy to get them back. Levels are packed with things to collect. There's Z's, which are your health, coins that give you extra lives, and more importantly, cogs. You need these to open the doors in the levels. The doors will always tell you how many cogs you need, and often there's exactly the right amount of cogs on each level. This can be kind of annoying, as if you miss just one of them, then you do have to do a lot of backtracking, but quite often the levels are reasonably linear, or not too crazy large, that you'll tend to collect them all on the way anyway. There's plenty of enemies all over the place as well, and what's nice is that each level has its own enemies. I always appreciate this. Yeah, sometimes they are just reskins, and often enemies do little more than just wander towards you and hope they hit you before you hit them, but it is nice to have some variety. You do have a few attacks, of course. You've got a candle that you can whack enemies with. This does a decent enough job, and you have the obligatory 3D platformer butt drop, but this is mainly used for switches, and you can also use a projectile, though you'll need to collect power-ups to be able to do that. What's cool here though is that each level there's little boxes, and you can jump in these boxes and then you're transformed into something new, like a ninja, a caveman, space ranger and more. This is where you get most of your powers, letting you do things like smashing walls, better attacks, moving faster and jumping higher. You'll need to use these forms throughout the levels to get everything that you need. You can still take damage while you're like this, and they only last a certain amount of time, but you can collect icons in the levels that top up your timer. These are always really fun to use. The variety in the levels is very good too, and while some of them can seem to drag, there are usually a handful of winks on each stage, so you won't be stuck on any of them for too long. Also, your house acts as the hub world, and here you get little side missions like races and so on to complete, where you can get extra lives and things like that. The graphics here are really cool with a good cartoony style. This is about as close to an N64 platform game as you can get on the system if you ask me, and of course it was also semi-recently released on the N64, as that version was originally cancelled until a Kickstarter got it properly released. But you can see the influences from the N64 games, especially in the controls, which make great use of the DualShock analog sticks. They are a little bit slippery, but overall the game is really fun to play and the controls weren't really a problem. Being able to control the camera of the other analog stick is spot on, and it really helps the experience. I really had a blast playing this, and while I haven't quite finished it yet, I'm on the third world, it is definitely one of the best 3D platform games I've played for the system, and I can imagine one that a lot of people have a lot of fond memories with, and I can see why. This one is highly recommended. It's a lot of fun, and that's what I like. Here is the Japan-only 70s robot anime Geppy-X, the super boosted armor. Japan always gets the best names for games. It's a side-scrolling shooter, and you won't believe it, but I actually looked it up. It's not actually based on an anime, instead it's just a parody of 70s mech anime stuff, which is really cool if you ask me. It has some pretty impressive cutscenes that really do look like they're from a real anime, but sadly it's all in Japanese, so I can't tell you what the hell is going on, but thankfully that doesn't affect the gameplay. You control a mech which has 3 different forms. Each of the forms has different weapons. You've got your usual lasers and rockets, and there's a couple of attack buttons, each one doing a different attack. One of the forms is also a melee version. You can hammer your attack buttons for a stream of bullets, or hold them down for a charged, more powerful attack. You can also press circle to change which way you're facing, so you can attack in front and behind you. As you'd expect, the levels are packed with enemies, and there's usually some really cool designs, a lot of which are based on animals it seems, especially the bosses, which are really fun to fight. In fact, that just sums up this game. It's just really fun. It doesn't really do anything particularly new, but what it does do, it does very well. The levels are just the right length, and they've got some cool in-game video bits which are actually quite funny, with a useless teammate trying to help all the time but just getting owned. It really helps keep you wanting to play to see what crazy stuff is going to happen. The game is actually kind of long as well, and is over a whopping 4 discs, though admittedly this is mainly down to the amount of cutscenes in the game, which are all fully animated. But that's not always a bad thing, as even though I can't understand them, they're still fun to watch with a load of crazy shit going on that only happens in things from Japan, and I love it. Something else I like is that it's not one-hit deaths here. You actually get a health bar, and enemies drop extra health for you every now and then, as well as power-ups that make your weapons more powerful until you're an unstoppable killing machine. As you can see, the graphics here are decent, with a mix of pre-rendered sprites and 3D polygons. It works well and run decently. I didn't notice any slowdown, which is nice. The controls are also excellent. It's easy to get around and attack. One of your forms is a melee mech that punches and kicks. That one I did find kinda useless, as you do have to get very close to enemies, so I never bothered using it, though I'm sure it's probably the most powerful one. Other than that though, this was a really fun game to play. Like I said, it won't do anything to blow you away, but it does everything right where it counts, and it's just an enjoyable time. Definitely recommended. While we're in Japan, let's take a look at 3D Shooting Tool, an interesting program that lets you make your very own 3D shooting game. The trouble is, it's all in Japanese, so I can't understand any of it. That's a shame, as it seems kind of fun. With the limited fiddling that I've done, I did manage to make Big Ben into a spaceship on an empty level. There is a fair amount of options if you're willing to put the time in to learn them. There's a selection of pre-made assets like ships and buildings, but you can also create your own ones by putting together a bunch of polygons and making things that look vaguely like other things. As well as this, you can create levels with a few different themes, and even enemies if you're so inclined, but I wasn't good enough. Thankfully, there are a few pre-made examples games in here, which give you an idea of the sort of things that you could do, and surprisingly, they're actually pretty decent. There's variety in the controls and physics, and a nice amount of enemies and locales. Now, of course, you'd need to put in a ton of time with the game to be able to create anything as detailed as what's here, but it does seem kind of intuitive, and I was able to figure out some of it without being able to read anything. As you've probably guessed, I can't really tell you much more about this game. I think it's a pretty cool tool though, and I actually like playing around on these sort of things to see what I can create. It is a shame I can't read any of the text, and I don't have the patience to sit there with the Translate app open on my phone to go through it all, as I reckon you'd be able to put together some pretty fun things. The graphics are actually kinda good, and of course the fact that you can make your own means that a lot of it will come down to how creative you are and how much time you're willing to put into it. And the controls are also variable, as you have a decent amount of control over how everything works. You can choose the responsiveness of controls, and you can even choose the weapons and shot types. It's not overly in depth, but has more than enough for you to make something fun if you're willing to. But yeah, that's really all I can say about this one. It is a fun little tool that has a lot of potential, but only if you can read Japanese. And finally for today, here is 102 Dalmatians. This is another 3D platform game based on the straight-to-DVD movie, sort of. In the game, you play as a couple of puppies, and you have to set out across London, where other 100 puppies have been dognapped and need rescuing. Of course, that evil Cruella de Vil is behind it all, so you'll need to bite her ankles while you're at it. Your adventure will take you all over London, from some nice parks to Big Ben, a toy shop for some reason, maybe it's meant to be Harrods, and a few other landmarks like Piccadilly. Each level is fairly decent in size and has about 6 or so dogs hidden in it that you need to find. The dogs are all in boxes that are seemingly randomly placed throughout the levels. You have to find them and smash the box open to rescue them, and it's actually pretty well done and quite fun to play. The levels themselves, as mentioned, are a good size, but they're never too big or complex, usually with 5 or 6 connected sections, making it easy to get around. As well as the puppies to rescue, there's also 100 bones on every level. Getting these gives you an extra life, and you can actually find extra lives in the levels as well. And on top of this, by completing certain tasks within the level, some of which are told to you by other characters, and some you have to discover for yourself, by interacting with objects on the level, you'll win stickers, which you can then muck about with in a sticker book. It doesn't really add much to the game, but I do really like how it's all set up, and gives you a reason to explore every inch of the levels. Of course, there's enemies here as well. These are in the form of dog catchers who just need to be avoided as they can't be defeated, as well as a series of deadly toys that for some reason want nothing more than to kill dogs. But you can fight back. You can bark, which does a decent job of killing stuff for some reason, but hey, it's a game, who cares? Or you have a roll attack, which gives you a little speed boost and is also how you smash boxes. You don't have to find every dog on every level before moving on to the next one, which is nice. If you find the exit on a stage you're on, you can always go through it and start the next level. Then at any point you can exit the stage you're on to go back to a previous one and collect anything you might have missed, and that's always a nice addition. The graphics here are pretty good. They're very clear and have a fair bit of detail, though this does come at the expense of a fair bit of texture warping and quite a lot of pop-up. And I also had times where the clipping was a bit off, and I couldn't tell if something was actually where it looked like it was, or if it was below me or behind me, but it was never that much of an issue. Also, and quite surprisingly, the camera is pretty decent here. You can't use the analog sticks unfortunately, so you have to use the shoulder buttons to move it around, but it is smooth and it doesn't get stuck too often. I never really had a hard time controlling it. I mean, an analog option would have been much better, but beggars can't be choosers. The controls themselves are also decent. The game is responsive and it's easy to do everything you need to do here. No complaints there. Now, this is clearly a game aimed at a younger audience, but I did still have a fair bit of fun with it. The Collectathon gameplay is well done and the graphics are good, and the level design means it was actually one that I wanted to keep playing. Believe it or not, I would actually recommend giving this a go if you're a fan of 3D platform games and you've already finished 40 Winks. So there you go, 10 games for the PS1 that you might have missed that start with a number. Not going to say they're all great, but there's definitely a few worth a look. As always, tell us your favourites in the comments below, and let me know any more games that could have been included. Now, for the actual last time this series, I'd like to say a sincere thank you to each and every one of you for watching. It has really been a pleasure reading your comments and chatting with you all, and I've had some fantastic suggestions for games from you, and I really do appreciate you watching. This has been a fun series to make, although it was a hell of a lot more work than I realised, and I'll definitely be doing a new A to Z in the new year, so make sure you let me know what system you want to see covered. Of course, there'll be plenty more videos released each week before then, so make sure you stick around and check out those videos in the meantime. And if you've got any suggestions for other future videos, I want to know about them. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time.